Of course, here is the rewritten story, optimized for viral YouTube storytelling. The Arizona sun was bleeding out over the Dragoon Mountains. You know the kind of sunset I'm talking about? The kind that looks like a wound in the sky, spilling copper and rust over the whole dang landscape. Long, spooky shadows crawled across the red dirt, and the only sound was the wind whispering through the sagebrush, telling secrets nobody wanted to hear. Out at the Whitlow Ranch, it was quiet. Too quiet. Eliza Whitlow stood on her porch, sleeves rolled up on arms that were tough as old leather. A rifle was leaning next to the door, casual-like, but it wasn't for decoration. Her eyes, gray as a storm cloud, scanned the horizon. It was a habit she'd picked up since her husband, Benjamin, came home in a pine box with a bullet in his chest and his mouth full of dust. Life out here didn't give you peace. It just gave you longer moments between the trouble. She was about to turn inside when she heard it. A knock, not a friendly knock, not a scared knock. It was steady, patient. The kind of knock a man makes when he knows you're home and he ain't leaving till he gets what he came for. Eliza's hand moved toward the rifle as she swung the door open. A man stood there, hat in his hand, but his eyes were hard. He was built solid, like he'd been carved out of the rock and grit of the trail itself. But it wasn't him that stole the air from Eliza's lungs. It was the little girl hiding behind his leg. She couldn't have been more than 10. Smudges of dirt on her cheeks, eyes wide and haunted. She clutched a worn-out cloth doll, and a single braid of hair snaked out from under her bonnet. She wasn't looking at Eliza with hope. She was looking at her like she was a cornered animal, trying to figure out which way to run. The man's voice was low like rocks, grinding in a dry creek bed. "Name's Hank Mercer. This is June. I was told you need a hand." Eliza's mind screamed at her. "Slam the door. Bar it. Go back to being alone. Alone is safe." But then she looked at the little girl again. June wasn't just hiding. She was shivering. And it wasn't from the cold. "Who told you that?" Eliza's voice was sharp. "Old man Farley down in Benson. Said you run this place by yourself." "That I do," Eliza said, her eyes never leaving his. "Don't mean I need help." Hank didn't flinch. He just stood there, a wall of tired muscle and unspoken history. But then the little girl June shifted, just enough for Eliza to see the dark, ugly bruise peeking out from under her sleeve. It was shaped like a man's hand. Suddenly, the quiet ranch didn't feel so safe anymore. Hank cleared his throat, his voice softer now. "We won't be a trouble, ma'am. Just a roof for the night. I can sleep in the barn." Eliza looked from the man's hard eyes to the girl's terrified ones. Something was wrong here. Terribly wrong. This wasn't a father and a daughter looking for work. This was a man on the run, and he'd brought the trouble right to her door. She let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, the wind howling a lonely tune. Then, against every instinct screaming at her to say no, she stepped aside. "Barn's full," she said, her voice flat. "You can take the spare room. One night." Hank tipped his hat. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me yet," she said, and led them into the quiet, dusty house that had just become a whole lot more dangerous. They ate in silence. The stew was thick, the air thicker. Eliza sat across from them, her rifle now resting on the floor by her chair. She watched the way Hank cut his meat, precise and efficient. She watched the way June ate, her eyes darting toward the door with every creak of the old house. These weren't the movements of a simple rancher and his kid. They were the movements of survivors. After dinner, June finally spoke. Her voice was a tiny whisper, barely there. "Do you have any animals?" Eliza was startled. "A few hens, a stubborn old cow, 2 horses." A ghost of a smile touched June's lips. "I like animals." Something in Eliza's chest, a knot she'd been carrying since Benjamin's funeral, loosened just a tiny bit. "You can meet him in the morning," she said. Later, after she'd shown them to the spare room, Eliza stood in the dark hallway. She could hear them through the door. Not talking, just breathing. The sound of other people under her roof was strange, unsettling. She heard Hank moving around, and then a soft thud, like he was wedging a chair under the doorknob. He wasn't just accepting her hospitality, he was fortifying a position. Eliza went back to the main room and sat in the dark, her rifle across her lap. She wasn't worried about what was in the spare room. She was worried about what was coming for them. As she drifted into a restless sleep, she heard a sound from their room. It was June talking in her sleep, a single terrified whisper that cut through the silence of the house. "Don't let him find me, Papa." But the name she whispered after that, it wasn't Hank. The next morning the sun rose, but the chill from the night before didn't leave. Eliza was up before the rooster, a habit ingrained by years of solitude. The ranch was falling apart, piece by piece. A crooked fence post here, a tipped-over wheelbarrow there. Each one was a reminder of all the things Benjamin had left unfinished. She was frying eggs when Hank appeared at the bottom of the stairs. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. "Figured I'd help with the animals," he said, his voice still that low gravel. Eliza just nodded and pointed him toward the barn. She watched him through the kitchen window. The way he moved was all wrong for a ranch hand. He wasn't clumsy or slow. He was efficient, almost military. He mucked out the stall with a powerful economy of motion. He fixed the crooked gate hinge with a few quick, precise movements. He wasn't just working, he was assessing, securing the perimeter. Who was this man? June came into the kitchen, rubbing sleep from her eyes. She sat at the table and Eliza served her a plate. The girl just stared at it. "You waiting on something?" Eliza asked. June looked up, her big sad eyes meeting Eliza's. "Papa always says we say thanks first." But she didn't call him Papa. She said it to Eliza, but when talking about him, it was always he. Hank came back inside, dusting his hands off. He gave June's hair a gentle pat, a gesture that seemed both practiced and foreign to him. As he sat down, Eliza noticed something she hadn't seen before. A tattoo on the inside of his wrist, mostly hidden by his sleeve. It was a simple design, a dry creek bed with a snake coiled beside it. It was a road mark, the kind of thing men who lived on the wrong side of the law used to identify each other. And Eliza knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she'd seen that mark before. On one of the men who'd ridden with the sheriff to tell her Benjamin was dead. The eggs and biscuits suddenly tasted like ash in her mouth. This wasn't a coincidence. This man, Hank, he wasn't just running from trouble. He was connected to the trouble that had destroyed her life. What had she done? What had she let into her home? Later that day, as June was cautiously collecting eggs, Eliza confronted him out by the barn. She kept her voice low, but it was as sharp as a razor. "That mark on your wrist," she said, not looking at him. "The Dry Creek brand. I've seen it before." Hank stopped what he was doing. He didn't deny it. He just stood there, his back to her. "A lot of men carry that brand, ma'am. Not a lot of them end up on my doorstep the same year my husband gets gunned down by men carrying it." He finally turned to face her. The friendly, tired traveler was gone. In his place was the man she'd seen on her porch the night before. Hard, dangerous. "What I was before I came here has nothing to do with why I'm here now." "Doesn't it?" she shot back. "You and that little girl show up out of nowhere. You barricade your door. You carry a brand that belongs to killers. And you want me to believe you're just here to mend fences?" "I'm here to keep her safe," he said, his eyes flicking toward the house where June was. "That's all that matters." "Safe from who? From your friends?" His jaw tightened. "They're not my friends." Before she could press him further, the sky began to change. The horizon turned a sick, bruised purple. The air went still and heavy. A desert storm was coming, and it was coming fast. The wind kicked up, howling like a banshee, and a loose sheet of tin on the cattle pen roof started to flap violently. "Roof's gonna give!" Eliza yelled over the wind. Hank was already moving, grabbing a rope and hammer. "We gotta get up there now!" They worked together, the wind trying to tear them from the roof. The air was electric, and every crash of thunder sounded like a gunshot. Eliza was hammering a nail when the rotten plank beneath her foot gave way. She pitched sideways, screaming as she fell, but she didn't hit the ground. A hand, strong as iron, clamped around her wrist. It was Hank. He'd lunged across the roof, holding her with one hand and gripping a beam with the other, his muscles straining. He hauled her up, his face inches from hers, and in his eyes she didn't see a killer. She saw the same desperation she felt, a desperation to protect what little they had left. Just as he pulled her to safety, she saw it. Out on the ridge, maybe half a mile away. 3 riders. They were just silhouettes against the stormy sky, watching the ranch, watching them. They weren't seeking shelter from the storm. They were waiting. The storm wasn't the only thing that had come for them. The trouble Hank was running from, it had found them. The storm passed, leaving the world washed clean and deceptively calm. But Eliza couldn't shake the image of the riders on the ridge. They were a promise, a threat. That morning, while Hank was out checking the fence line for damage, Eliza felt a sudden urge. She went to the old bookshelf Benjamin had built. The bottom drawer had been stuck for years, warped by the damp. She knelt and gave it a hard tug. It wasn't the drawer that moved. A false panel behind it popped open, revealing a hollow space in the floorboards. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She reached inside and pulled out a bundle of letters, tied with a leather string. They were addressed to her husband. Her hands trembled as she opened the first one. Ben, it read. They came again. The syndicate. Their offer is final. They know about the water rights. They said if you don't sign the ranch over, they'll burn it to the ground with you and Eliza in it. The next letter was even worse. Ben, you were right to refuse, but you were a fool to threaten them. They don't just buy land, they bury secrets. You need to get out. Take Eliza and run. The man they send to clean up messes. They call him the Mercer. He doesn't leave witnesses. Eliza dropped the letters. Her world tilted on its axis. The Mercer. Hank Mercer. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a damn execution order. He hadn't come to her ranch by chance. He'd been sent to kill her husband. Or worse. Maybe he'd been sent to finish the job. The blood drained from her face. She looked at the letters, then at the kitchen knife on the counter. Every instinct told her to run, to grab June and get as far away from this man as possible. He wasn't a protector. He was a predator, hiding in plain sight. She heard the creak of the porch steps. Hank was coming back. She snatched up the letters, her mind racing. She couldn't let him know she knew. Not yet. She had to play along. She had to figure out his game. Was he here for the land? Was he here for her? Or was there something else? Something she didn't know? When he walked in, she forced a calm she didn't feel. Find anything. A few posts down. Nothing I can't fix, he said, his eyes scanning her face. He knew something was off. You all right? Just tired, she lied, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The storm. He didn't look convinced, but he let it go. She watched him all day, her suspicion a poison in her veins. She saw the way his eyes constantly swept the horizon. She saw the way he always positioned himself between the open door and where June was playing. He wasn't just fixing a ranch. He was securing a kill zone. That night she couldn't sleep. She waited until the house was dark and silent. Then she slipped out of her room, rifle in hand. She crept to the door of the spare room and listened. She heard voices, Hank's low rumble, and June's soft whisper. He was a bad man, wasn't he? June asked. My real father? Eliza froze, her ear pressed to the wood. Hank's voice was full of a pain that sounded terrifyingly real. He made some bad choices, kid. That's all. Is that why you had to stop him? A long silence. Then Hank's voice, thick with regret. Yeah, June, that's why. Eliza stumbled back from the door. A hand clapped over her mouth to stifle a gasp. It wasn't just Benjamin. Hank had killed June's father, too. This quiet, helpful man who fixed her fences and made her laugh. He was a monster, a cold-blooded killer who collected orphans. And now both of them were sleeping under her roof. Just as she was backing away, her boot heel hit a loose floorboard. It let out a loud creak that echoed through the silent house. The whispering inside the room stopped instantly. A second later, she heard the unmistakable metallic click of a hammer being cocked on a revolver. He knew she was out there, and he knew that she knew. The door opened so fast it was just a blur of motion. Hank stood there, revolver in his hand, pointed at the floor but ready. His face was a mask of stone. June was hiding behind him, her eyes wide with fear. Eliza, he said. It wasn't a question. She stood her ground, her own rifle held tight. Who are you? She whispered, her voice shaking. Who are you, really? He holstered his weapon, a sign of trust she wasn't sure she believed. My name is Hank Mercer. That part's true. And yes, he said, his voice dropping, I worked for the Dry Creek Syndicate. I was the man they sent when things got messy. The Mercer, she breathed, the name from the letters tasting like poison. You were sent to kill my husband. He winced, the first crack in his stone facade. I was. That was the order. But when I got here, Ben was already dead. His own partners got to him first. They found out he was planning to expose them, to take a ledger full of their crimes to the law. Eliza stared at him, trying to find the lie in his eyes. And June? Her father was another man Ben had crossed, a partner in the syndicate. They killed him to send a message. I found her hiding in a cellar. I was supposed to clean up. No witnesses. He looked down at the floor. But I couldn't. I looked at her, and I saw every bad thing I'd ever done. So I took her, and I ran. You ran here, Eliza said, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. To the scene of the crime. Why? Because Ben's last letter, the one I found on his body, it said the ledger was here, hidden on this ranch. He said it was his life insurance. I came here thinking I could find it, use it to buy our freedom, to disappear for good. A cold dread washed over Eliza. The syndicate hadn't just killed her husband for land. They were hunting for this ledger, and Hank had led them right to it, right to her. As if summoned by the thought, they heard a sound from outside. Hoofbeats, a single rider, approaching slow and steady. Hank's blood ran cold. Get back inside, he hissed, pushing Eliza and June away from the door. He peered through the window. It's him. A man on a tall black horse dismounted. He was dressed in a fine city coat, his boots polished to a shine. He walked up the path like he owned it, a predatory smile on his face. Silas Vane, Hank muttered. My old boss, the man who gives the orders. Vane stopped on the porch, not even bothering to knock. Mercer, he called out, his voice smooth as silk and sharp as a razor. I know you're in there. You've led us on a merry chase, but it ends tonight. Give me the girl and the ledger, and I might let the widow live. Eliza looked at Hank. The man she'd thought was a monster was her only line of defense against the real devil standing on her porch. The ledger, she whispered, her mind racing. Benjamin mentioned a safe place in his letters. Under the hearth, where our future is warm. Hank's eyes widened, the loose stone in the fireplace. But it was too late. Vane wasn't waiting for an invitation. With a single powerful kick, he splintered the door and burst into the house. Time's up, Vane snarled, a long-barreled pistol appearing in his hand. His cold eyes landed on June, cowering behind Eliza. Now let's talk business. Silas Vane was a snake in a fancy coat. He moved into the room with a chilling confidence, his pistol never wavering. Well, Mercer, this is a cozy little setup you found. Playing house? It doesn't suit you. Hank stepped forward, positioning himself between Vane and Eliza. Leave them out of this, Vane. Your business is with me. Vane laughed, a cold, empty sound. Your business is my business. You stole my property. His eyes flicked to June. And you're standing on the one piece of land that can bring my entire operation down. So, no. I think everyone here is very much in this. He took a step closer. The ledger. Whitlow was smarter than I gave him credit for. He hid it well. Now you're going to give it to me. Or what? Eliza said, her voice shaking but defiant. Vane's smile widened. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, carved wooden bird. He tossed it onto the floor in front of June. The girl gasped and shrank back. It was the exact same kind of bird as the one she clutched in her hand, the one her real father had carved for her. I know all about you, little one, Vane said softly. I know who your father was, and I know he screamed your name right before I put a bullet in his heart. June let out a choked sob. The room exploded. Hank lunged, not with a gun, but with a primal roar of fury. He was a blur of motion, a force of nature. He slammed into Vane, and the two men crashed over the dining table, splintering the wood. The pistol went skittering across the floor. Eliza reacted on pure instinct. She shoved June behind her. Get to the cellar, she screamed, pointing to the trapdoor in the kitchen. Then she grabbed the cast iron skillet from the stove. Vane was slick and fast. He rolled out from under Hank and came up with a knife in his hand. He slashed, catching Hank across the arm. Blood welled, dark and immediate, but Hank didn't even flinch. He just came back at him, his fists like hammers. Eliza saw her chance. While Vane was focused on Hank, she scrambled for the fireplace. Her fingers found the loose stone instantly. She pulled it free and reached into the dark hollow behind it. Her hand closed around a thick, leather-bound book. The ledger. "I have it!" she yelled. Vane heard her. He shoved Hank back with a powerful kick and turned his attention to her. His eyes were burning with a greedy fire. "Give it to me, widow." "Go to hell," she spat. He charged at her, but just as he reached her, the front door burst open again. It was the riders from the ridge, 3 of them, guns drawn. They'd been Vane's backup, waiting for the signal. They were trapped, utterly and completely. One of the men grabbed Eliza, wrenching the ledger from her hands. Another put his gun to Hank's head. Vane stood back, straightening his coat, that smug, victorious smile back on his face. "You see, Mercer," he said, taking the ledger. "The house always wins. You should have stayed loyal." He opened the book, his eyes scanning the pages. All my accounts, all my names. Benjamin really did keep meticulous records. He snapped the book shut. "A shame it all has to go up in smoke." He nodded to one of his men, who pulled out a flask and began splashing kerosene all over the wooden floor. "You're just going to burn it?" Hank growled, straining against the man holding him. "The evidence." "Of course," Vane said, "along with the witnesses." He lit a match. "Goodbye, Mercer. Say hello to Ben for me." He tossed the match onto the kerosene-soaked floor. The world erupted in flames. The fire spread with a terrifying speed, devouring the dry wood of the old ranch house. Smoke filled the room, thick and choking. Vane and his men backed out, laughing, leaving them to burn. "The cellar!" Hank yelled, shoving the gunman off him in a burst of adrenaline. "Eliza, go!" But the path to the kitchen was blocked by a wall of fire. They were cut off. The heat was unbearable, the roar of the flames deafening. Panic seized Eliza. This was it. This was how it ended. Burned alive in the home her husband had built, a home that had become a tomb. "The window!" Hank grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the back of the room. He smashed the glass with his elbow and shoved her through the opening. She landed hard in the dirt outside, gasping for clean air. She turned back just in time to see a burning beam crash down from the ceiling, right where they had been standing. "Hank!" she screamed. For a heart-stopping second, there was nothing. Then he emerged through the flames and smoke, half carrying, half dragging the gunman he'd knocked out. He threw the man clear of the house and collapsed beside Eliza, coughing, his arm bleeding freely, his face black with soot. But there was no time for relief. Vane and his other 2 men were mounting their horses, the ledger tucked safely in Vane's saddlebag. They were getting away, with everything. "June!" Eliza gasped, scrambling to her feet. "She's still in the cellar." The house was an inferno now. The front porch collapsed with a deafening groan. They'd never get to the kitchen trap door. "There's another way," Eliza said, her mind working frantically. "An old root cellar door, around back. Ben boarded it up years ago." They raced around the side of the burning house, the heat scorching their skin. They found the door covered in overgrown vines and sealed with thick, rusted nails. "Stand back," Hank grunted. Ignoring the pain in his arm, he kicked at the door. Once. Twice. On the third kick, the rotten wood splintered and gave way. They plunged into the cool, dark earth. "June!" Eliza called out, her voice raw. A small whimper came from the far corner. They found her huddled behind some old barrels, terrified but unharmed. Eliza grabbed her, holding her tight. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're okay." But they weren't. They were trapped underground, while the only evidence that could save them was riding away into the night. Hank put a hand on Eliza's shoulder. His voice was grim. "They won't get far. They'll think we're dead. They'll get careless. We have one chance." "What chance?" Eliza asked, her hope dwindling. "They have the ledger. They have the horses. We have nothing." "We have this land," Hank said, his eyes glinting in the dark. "And I know a shortcut through the canyon. the one place they won't expect us to be. But we have to go now. Eliza looked at her burning home, the life she had known turning to ash. Then she looked at the determined face of the killer who had saved her life, and the terrified child clinging to her. Her old life was over. A new one, a dangerous and uncertain one, had just begun. Okay, she said, her voice steady now, forged in the fire. Let's go get it back. They climbed out of the cellar and into a world lit by the orange glow of their own ruin. They didn't look back. They slipped into the darkness of the desert, three ghosts running from a fire, chasing an even bigger one. The desert at night is another world. The shortcut Hank knew was less of a trail and more of a ghost path, a treacherous snake of a canyon that cut through the mountains. They scrambled over rocks and through thorny brush, the only light coming from a sliver of moon. Every shadow looked like one of Vane's men. Every gust of wind sounded like hoofbeats. June was flagging, her small legs struggling to keep up. Hank, weak from blood loss, was starting to stumble. Eliza was running on pure, uncut rage. They had taken her home. They had threatened this child. They would not win. We're not going to make it, Hank finally gasped, leaning against a rock wall. They'll be in the next county by the time we clear this canyon. No, Eliza said, her voice hard. They won't, she pointed up. Ahead of them, the canyon narrowed into a bottleneck, a place so tight that only one horse could pass through at a time. They have to come through there. It's the only way to the main road without backtracking. A plan started to form in her mind, a desperate, crazy plan. Give me your knife, she said to Hank. He handed it over without question. She looked at the narrow pass, then at the steep, rocky cliffs on either side. It was a natural trap. I can climb, she said. I can get above them. 'Cause a rock slide. Block the pass. It's too dangerous, Hank argued. And what then? We're three people on foot against three armed men on horseback. We won't be on foot, she said, her eyes glinting. When the rocks fall, they'll be separated from their horses. In the confusion, you grab the mounts. I'll get the ledger. It was a suicide mission, but it was the only mission they had. She started to climb. The rock was sharp and unforgiving, tearing at her hands. Below, Hank moved into position, hiding with June behind a cluster of boulders. They waited. It felt like an eternity. Then they heard it. The clatter of hooves on stone. Vane and his men were coming. Eliza held her breath. She found her perched directly above the narrowest part of the pass. Below her, she could see them. Vane was in the lead, the ledger clearly visible in his saddlebag. He was laughing about something. Eliza found her leverage. She put all of her weight against a massive, unstable-looking boulder. It groaned, shifted, and then it gave way. It started a chain reaction. A river of rock and dust cascaded down the canyon wall, crashing into the pass with the sound of thunder. The horses screamed and reared, throwing their riders. Dust and chaos filled the narrow canyon. It was now or never. Eliza scrambled down the other side as Hank burst from his hiding spot. He was a whirlwind of motion, grabbing the reins of two of the panicked horses before the stunned gunmen could even get to their feet. Eliza ran straight for Vane's horse. The animal was bucking wildly, but the saddlebag was right there. She lunged, her fingers closing around the leather strap. Vane saw her. He let out a roar of fury and scrambled up, pulling his pistol. You! He screamed, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. He fired. The shot went wide, the bullet ricocheting off the canyon wall inches from her head. She tore the saddlebag free and turned to run. But one of Vane's men was there. He grabbed her, his fingers digging into her arms. She fought back, kicking and scratching, but he was too strong. He twisted her arm behind her back, pressing the cold steel of a pistol to her temple. "Drop it, Mercer!" the man yelled. "Or the widow gets it!" Hank froze. The reins of the horses clutched in his hand. Vane walked slowly toward Eliza, his smug smile returning. "Clever," Vane said, plucking the ledger from her grasp. "I'll give you that, but you should have stayed dead." He tucked the ledger safely inside his coat. "Kill them all," he ordered his men. "And this time, make sure there's nothing left but bones." It was over. They had failed. But then a new sound cut through the chaos. A voice, high and clear, echoing from the top of the canyon. "Hey!" Everyone looked up. Standing on the ridge, silhouetted against the moon, was the last person they expected to see, the town lawyer, Joseph Calder. And he wasn't alone. Lined up on the ridge on either side of him were a dozen ranchers and miners from the town of Clifton, and every single one of them was holding a rifle. "Silas Vane!" Calder's voice boomed across the canyon. "By the authority of the citizens of this territory, you and your men are under arrest for theft, arson, and murder." Vane stared, his jaw slack with shock. "You? How?" "The widow sent me a letter a week ago," Calder announced. "Told me she was suspicious. Told me to be ready. Looks like her instincts were good." Eliza stared up at him, stunned. She hadn't sent any letter. Then she saw Hank. He was looking at her, a small, tired smile on his face. He had sent the letter. He had been planning for this all along. He had never lost hope. Vane's man, startled by the sudden appearance of a dozen rifles, loosened his grip on Eliza just for a second. It was all she needed. She slammed her elbow back into his gut, stomped on his instep, and dove for cover as a volley of shots rang out from the ridge. The canyon erupted into a full-blown gunfight. The townsfolk on the ridge had the high ground, laying down covering fire. Vane's men were trapped, caught between the rock slide and the rifles. Hank shoved June back behind the safety of the boulders. "Stay down," he ordered before turning back to the fight. He didn't have a gun, but he had a plan. Vane was trying to scramble back to his one remaining horse, the ledger still tucked in his coat. He was their only ticket out of this. Hank cut him off, tackling him hard. The two men rolled in the dirt, a desperate, brutal fight of fists and knives. Eliza saw her opening. While Hank kept Vane busy, she crept toward the two gunmen who were pinned down behind some rocks, firing uselessly up at the ridge. She had Hank's knife. She moved like a ghost, her heart pounding but her hands steady. She'd spent years hunting animals on this land. Now she was hunting men. She came up behind the first one and put the knife to his throat. "Drop it," she hissed, "or I'll cut you ear to ear." The man froze, then slowly let his rifle clatter to the ground. His partner turned, his eyes wide, but it was too late. One of the ranchers on the ridge, an old man named Barrow who ran the feed store, took careful aim and shot the gun right out of his hand. 2 down, 1 to go. Hank and Vane were still locked in a life-or-death struggle. Vane was bigger, but Hank was faster, driven by years of guilt and a burning need for redemption. He finally got the upper hand, landing a solid punch that sent Vane staggering back. Vane tripped and fell. Right next to the horse. With a final burst of energy, he hauled himself into the saddle. "You lose, Mercer!" he screamed, kicking the horse into a gallop, riding straight for the rock slide, looking for a way through. He wasn't going to make it. Eliza knew it. The path was too unstable. "The ledger!" Hank yelled. Vane, in a final act of spite, pulled the book from his coat. "If I can't have it, no one can," he shrieked, and he hurled it. Not toward them, but into a deep, dark crevice in the canyon wall. At that exact moment, the horse lost its footing on the loose scree. It let out a terrified cry as it, in vain, tumbled over the edge of the embankment, disappearing into the darkness below. A moment of stunned silence. Then the townsfolk started cheering. It was over. Calder and the others made their way down into the canyon. They rounded up the two remaining gunmen, tying their hands securely. Eliza ran to June, pulling her into a fierce hug. The little girl was crying, but this time, they were tears of relief. Hank walked over to Eliza, clutching his wounded arm. He looked exhausted, broken, but alive. He looked at the smoking ruin of Vane and the horse at the bottom of the ravine, then at the crevice where the ledger had fallen. "We lost it," he said, his voice heavy. "Without that book, we can't prove anything. The rest of the syndicate will walk free." "Maybe not," said a voice. It was Old Man Barrow. He was holding up a single torn page. "This must have flown out when he threw it." Calder took the page. He read it, and his eyes went wide. "My God," he whispered. "This page alone lists the names of a territorial judge and a U.S. Marshal. It says they're on the syndicate's payroll." He looked at the rest of the townsfolk, his voice ringing with a newfound authority. "This is more than enough. This one page will bring the whole corrupt house of cards down." Justice hadn't been lost in the ravine. It had been delivered. Calder walked over to Eliza. The town is grateful, ma'am. We're in your debt. He looked at the smoldering glow on the horizon, the last embers of her home. We'll help you rebuild. Every last one of us. Eliza looked at the faces around her, her neighbors, people who had been strangers just days ago. Now they were allies. They were a community. She looked at Hank, who was smiling tiredly at June, and she looked at June, who was holding her hand like she'd never let go. Her house was gone, but for the first time in a very long time, she was finally home. They didn't rebuild the old house. They built a new one. The whole town helped. Miners brought stone from the quarry. Ranchers brought timber down from the mountains. The women brought food and helped raise the walls. It was slow, hard work under the unforgiving Arizona sun. In the evenings, they'd sit around a campfire, sharing stories. Hank, his arm bandaged, would quietly whittle a piece of wood. He was carving a small bird for June, one that wasn't a reminder of a monster, but a symbol of a new beginning. Eliza found she liked the sounds of the work, the hammers, the saws, the laughter. It was the sound of life returning to a place that had been silent for too long. She worked alongside the men, her hands as calloused as theirs, her resolve as strong as the new foundation. One night after everyone had gone home, she and Hank stood on the half-finished porch, looking out at the star-dusted landscape. "You never told me you wrote to Calder," she said quietly. "Couldn't take the chance," he replied, not looking at her. "I brought this trouble to you. I had to have a way to end it, just in case." "You could have died, Hank." He finally turned to her. In the soft moonlight, the hardness was gone from his eyes. There was only a deep, weary sadness, and something else. Something that looked a lot like hope. Some things are worth dying for, Eliza. A few weeks later, Calder rode out from town. The syndicate was finished. The corrupt judge and marshal had been arrested. The ledger page had started a fire that had burned all the way to Washington. The Dry Creek land grab was over. He also brought another piece of paper. Adoption forms. Hank signed them without hesitation, and when he handed the pen to June to make her mark, she didn't write June. She carefully wrote June Mercer. That night, as the new house neared completion, the town came back. But they didn't come to work. One by one, they walked up the path, each carrying a lit lantern. They hung them on the new porch rails, on the fence posts, on the corral gate. Soon the entire ranch was bathed in a soft, warm glow, a beacon of light in the vast, dark desert. It was a silent promise from the community. You are not alone. We are here. This is your home. Eliza, Hank, and June stood on the porch, watching the last of the lanterns being hung. June was leaning against Eliza's side, fast asleep on her feet. Hank gently picked her up. "Time for bed, kid," he whispered. He carried her inside and tucked her into her new bed in her new room. Eliza stood in the doorway, watching. When Hank came out, he and Eliza stood in the quiet of their new home, the lantern light streaming through the windows. "I never asked for any of this," Eliza said, her voice barely a whisper. "I know," Hank said. "My whole world burned down." "I know." She finally looked at him, her gray eyes clear and steady. "And I've never been more grateful." He didn't say anything. He just reached out and took her hand. His hand was rough and scarred, the hand of a killer and a carpenter. Her hand was tough and calloused, the hand of a widow and a survivor. Together, they felt like a perfect fit. The land was quiet. The war was over. And under the gentle glow of 100 lanterns, a new family had been forged in the heart of the desert, built not on blood, but on courage, sacrifice, and a love as fierce and resilient as the land itself. They had found their justice, and in the process, they had found each other. If you enjoyed this story of how a quiet ranch became a battlefield for the soul of the West, and how 3 broken people found a way to build a home out of the ashes, then you're in the right place. We tell stories about the dust, the blood, and the heart that it took to tame this wild land. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because the trail doesn't end here. There's always another story just over the next ridge, waiting to be told. Leave a comment below and let me know. What would you have done if Hank knocked on your door? Until next time, stay safe and watch your back trail.